Today, we're still on Proposition 37. We covered the first scholium last time, but there's a second scholium that we will cover today, and it's concerned with the state. It's a very brief summary of Spinoza's political theory, which he developed at great length in other works, the Theological Political Treatise and another political treatise that he started after the Ethics but never finished. So he introduces this topic by saying that he wants to explain what he means by merit and sin, justice and injustice. I'll read a few passages. This one is rather sonorous. Every man exists by sovereign natural right, and consequently by sovereign natural right performs those actions which follow from the necessity of his own nature. Therefore, by sovereign natural right, every man judges what is good and what is bad, takes care of his own advantage according to his own disposition, avenges the wrongs done to him, and endeavors to preserve that which he loves and to destroy that which he hates. So this is the Hobbesian state of nature, and it applies to all of the modes of substance as much as it does to man. And the problem for Spinoza with this state of affairs is that men are going to be prey to their passions. They stand in need of mutual help in order to live the life of reason that he described in the propositions that we covered last day. So in Spinoza's thought, we have seen that he has said that an emotion, such as a passion, can only be restrained by another emotion which is stronger to it and contrary to it. So the state has to operate on this principle that men will avoid inflicting injury to each other through fear of incurring greater injury to themselves. On this law, society can be established so long as it keeps in its own hand the right, possessed by everyone, of avenging injury and pronouncing on good and evil. So the state has its own conatus and seeks to preserve its being in the same way as all the other modes of substance. Spinoza's picture is suggested, at least in Book 2, where we have a mention of hierarchies of bodies, so more complex bodies being constituted by congeries of simpler bodies. So you have, say, individual cells making up tissues, tissues making up organs, organs making up animals, such as humans, humans constituting societies. And all of these, in Spinoza's view, are endowed with a conatus, seeking to preserve their being, whether by competition with other individuals or by cooperating with them. So the state then has the power to lay down a general rule of conduct and to pass laws sanctioned not by reason, which is powerless in restraining emotion. He'll qualify that later. When in Book 5, we'll see that the particular type of reason that he's concerned with there is effective in nature. It's the intellectual love of God. So not by reason, but by threats. Okay, such a society established with laws and the power of preserving itself is called a state. And those who live under its protection are called citizens. So since in the state of nature there is nothing which by universal consent is pronounced good or bad, um, he concludes that in the state of nature, sin is inconceivable. Sin, for Spinoza, is merely disobedience to the laws of the state, and merit, the contrary, is obedience. So that's how he disposes of sin and merit. As for justice and injustice, for Spinoza, rights such as property rights are conferred on the citizens by the state. They're not intrinsic. So he says no one is by common consent master of anything, nor is there anything in nature which can be said to belong to one man rather than another. All things are common to all. Hence, ideas such as justice and injustice can exist only in a state or civil society. So fairly similar to Hobbes, with I think the difference that for Spinoza, civil society is a means towards human flourishing and not merely a necessary imposition to prevent the war of all against all. Moving on then, Spinoza has now two propositions about the body. So far, he has only talked about the conatus in terms of the mind. Remember, he has told us that there is nothing that we certainly know to be good or evil, except for those things which are conducive to understanding. He has framed it entirely in terms of the mind's power to understand, because he has defined active and passive emotions in terms of adequate and inadequate ideas. But he also has this principle of the dual aspect monism between mind and body. This is his answer to Cartesian mind-body dualism and the myth of free will. So here he has two propositions where he states his ideas of how the conatus plays out in a human organism regarded solely as a body. And he's going to make use of these in some of the propositions which we will see very shortly. So proposition 38, it states that whatever disposes the human body so as to render it capable of being affected in an increased number of ways, or of affecting external bodies in an increased number of ways, is useful to man. And then there's the obvious converse to this, that if the number of ways decreases, it's harmful to man. So he's simply saying that the greater the scope of interaction with the environment, the greater the power of the body to persist in being. It's curious, though, if you look at the proof actually appeals to the organism viewed under the attribute of thought, because he says, whatsoever thus increases the capabilities of the body increases also the mind's capability of perception, and hence potentially the mind's power of understanding. So he appeals to the mental characterization of the conatus that he has already given us. um, in demonstrating this proposition. It really is the case that Spinoza is more interested in the mind than the body. Um, but moving on to proposition 39, he states a version of the conatus principle, which we will see he shortly appeals to when he returns to his discussion of the emotions, passive and active. The thing to note here is that whenever Spinoza talks about the body, that's the human being under the attribute of extension, he uses the language of 17th century physics as laid out in the beginning of book 2. Whenever he talks about the mind, he reverts to a more scholastic treatment and talks about things like the essence of the mind. He never talks about the essence of the body. For Spinoza, a body, a human body or any other body, is characterized by what he calls the proportion of motion and rest prevailing in its parts, so that the preservation of the being of a body is just a matter of preserving this proportion. So the statement of proposition 39 says, whatever brings about the preservation of the proportion of motion and rest, which the parts of the human body mutually possess, is good. Contrariwise, whatsoever causes a change in such proportion is bad. I don't think it needs any further elucidation, except, well, he points out here that the extent to which such causes, these bodily changes, can injure or be of service to the mind will be explained in the fifth part. He is really going to be concerned exclusively with the mind, but he uses this characterization, this bodily characterization of the conatus, in the demonstrations of some of the propositions which we are now about to encounter. Proposition 50 states, whatsoever conduces to a man's social life or causes men to live together in harmony is useful, whereas whatsoever brings discord into a state is bad. Now, surely an uncontroversial proposition, although Spinoza's spin is characteristically rationalist. The state is good because it promotes the life of reason. It enables men to live according to reason rather than according to their passions. Okay, now starting at proposition 41, he will have a sequence of propositions where he looks at various emotions as they can manifest either as passions or as actions, active emotions, depending on whether or not the ideas, the cognitive aspects of these emotions are adequate or inadequate. So he starts off by saying that pleasure in itself is not bad but good, contrariwise pain is itself bad. So good and bad, good and evil, is already defined as our consciousness of pleasure and pain. Proposition 42 states that mirth cannot be excessive but is always good. Contrariwise, melancholy is always bad. So this word mirth, we encountered it before, although I think the translator may have translated it differently. The Latin word is hilaritas, which could hardly be translated as hilarity, so he calls it mirth. And he says that what he means by this is that it is a pleasure which, insofar as it is referred to the body, consists in all of the parts of the body being affected equally. That means that the proportion of motion and rest is being preserved. In practice, what it means is that it is not the case that one part of our nature is being stimulated to the detriment of the organism as a whole. Okay, that is the correct interpretation will become clear very shortly in a scholium to the next proposition. You see, he contrasts this thing called mirth with what he calls stimulation, which is, well, localized pleasure, meaning that the pleasure is restricted to one part of our nature and may become excessive. For that reason, this pleasure may be pursued to the detriment of our nature as a whole. And he contrasts this stimulation with what he calls grief. Grief, being a species of pain, is necessarily bad, but it may be the lesser of two evils, such as a hangover has the benefit of it's painful, but it prevents alcohol abuse. So we'll see that theme coming up a few times later on, that this notion of a relative good, a lesser of two evils. So he then says in proposition 44, love and desire may be excessive because this stimulation, which he has just been talking about, may be not beneficial because it's not beneficial to the organism as a whole. So he gives, several examples of this in the scholium following this proposition 44. He says that mirth, this generalized pleasure, which I've stated to be good, can be conceived more easily than it can be observed, that our emotions are generally excessive, not being governed by reason. And they may fix the mind in contemplation of one object in such a way that it is unable to think of others. And in extreme cases, he uses the word delirious or mad to characterize the mind in that sort of state, such as he gives examples of infatuation, of a miser thinking of nothing but money, of an ambitious man thinking of nothing but glory, and other examples are avarice, ambition, lust, and so forth, which he says are species of madness, although they may not be reckoned among the diseases, presumably because they are so widespread. Next, proposition 45, hatred can never be good. The proof is when we hate a man, we endeavor to destroy him. When he uses that word destroy, he appears to frequently mean lesser degrees of destruction, such as removing the object of hate. But in any case, he says we endeavor to do something that is bad. This sounds like a rather lazy attempt at a proof. To establish that hatred can never be good, he merely needs to say that hatred is a painful emotion, and painful by definition means bad. But one way or the other, it's important to understand here that Spinoza is not moralizing. Okay, he's not enjoining us not to hate. He's saying that it is a logical consequence of his system that hatred is bad. That's all that needs to be said about it. So, but he concludes then that in consequence that envy, derision, contempt, anger, revenge, and other emotions attributable to hatred or arising therefrom are also bad. And whatsoever we desire whatsoever we desire from motives of hatred is base and in a state unjust. In the Scholium, he distinguishes between derision and laughter, saying that one is a species of hatred and the other a species of pleasure. And so he says that they differ greatly from each other. And then he launches into a lengthy scolding, which I think is worth paying attention to, because it shows how much Spinoza appears to have been influenced by the Epicurean outlook on life rather than the Stoics. Certainly he was interested or influenced by the Stoics, but this passage is not Stoical in character. So let me read some of it and we'll conclude with that for today. Assuredly, nothing forbids man to enjoy himself save grim and gloomy superstition. I think we can safely read religion for this, the established Calvinist religion of his day. For why is it more lawful to satiate one's hunger and thirst than to drive away one's melancholy? I reason and have convinced myself as follows. No deity, nor anyone else, save the envious, takes pleasure in my infirmity and discomfort, nor sets down to my virtue the tears, sobs, fear, and the like, which are the signs of infirmity of spirit. On the contrary, the greater the pleasure wherewith we are affected, the greater the perfection whereto we pass. In other words, the more must we necessarily partake of the divine nature. I say it is the part of a wise man to refresh and recreate himself with moderate and pleasant food and drink, and also with perfumes, with the soft beauty of growing plants, with dress, with music, with many sports, with theatres and the like, such as every man may make use of without injury to his neighbour. For the human body is composed of very numerous parts of diverse nature, which continually stand in need of fresh and varied nourishment, so that the whole body may be equally capable of performing all the actions which follow from the necessity of its own nature, and consequently, so that the mind may also be equally capable of understanding many things simultaneously.